Welcome to Transformation Heroes by Feedia, a series dedicated to CX professionals.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Transformation Heroes. Joined once again by Francois. Hello, Francois.
Hello, Carlos. Good to be back.
Good to see you. So today we want to be talking about the measuring customer experience in the physical world. So we'll be going through 3 effective methods for measuring customer experience. Before we kind of dive into those methods and how they interact with the physical world, I'd really like to get an overall kind of introduction onto this topic. So Francois, if you could, what are some of the more significant challenges businesses face when trying to measure customer experience in the physical setting?
Well, first of all, it's very hard because you have no, like when you're doing it from a digital standpoint, like you have the information from your CRM system, you have like information, like you have the email address, you have the contact information, you can link to the purchase, you can link to the order, which is very hard to do if you don't make this connection on the physical world. So I would say that's a first one, which is about like the amount of information you have and that is available to you as someone that's trying to understand what's going on the physical world, because you cannot be everywhere every time. And then I think there was also another point, Carlos, about, like you're in front of staff. So being honest and transparent when you have someone, a human being in front of you that's smiling at you, like sometimes you're going to be influenced by a lot of things, which you don't really have when you receive an email that you're going to click through your inbox. You don't have these eyes looking onto you, right? So I think that's changed a lot when it comes to customer experience, because again, like customer experience is something that's very much, like it's human emotions, right?
Yeah, it'd be good to just expand on that a little bit. The balance between collecting actionable customer data whilst also maintaining trust in these physical spaces.
Yeah, that's an excellent starting point, Carlos. And I think like I have a lot of examples, but I'll go through one or two right now. Like one of them is, for example, if you put your QR code in front of the, like the staff or the or before you actually start the experience, like it just doesn't make any sense, and it's very hard for someone to leave you a very bad or very honest review if they don't find what they're looking for and so on, if it's in front of the staff, right? Like it doesn't really work. And I think like these kind of examples, like we have a lot. Like there are also some other ones about people that are going to give you gifts or that are going to give you stuff if you leave a reviews in front of them. The most important challenge in this equation is really like, how do you make it reliable? Rather than, because again, like you have very little information and it can be influenced by a lot of things which you don't have when you send an email to someone.
Let's talk about QR codes. So method 1 is measuring through QR codes. I'd love for you just to talk through a brief history of QR codes, because they've been with us for quite some time, and they've received a lot of expansion over the last few years and rapid use. So maybe if you could talk on that a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah. So QR code is not like a new technology. It's been around for a very long time. So that idea that you can print a graphics and this graphic contains some text, some metadata, and that you can use as a smartphone to actually decode this information and, like go from the physical world to the digital world. And I think this transition is very, very interesting. And I think the life of I'm no expert into QR code. I'll give you my point of view on that, Carlos. But the thing is, from a B2B standpoint, it's used a lot like any delivery center and so on. Like there's lots of QR codes everywhere. Yeah, exactly. But from a B2C standpoint, like it was not used that much on smartphones. With smartphone, there was a little bit of a wave being like, QR codes are important in a 2010-ish. And then it kind of like went down again as being completely useless, except in Asia, where they've used it a lot. Like for example, in China, where you can pay with a QR code, and you've been able to do that for a very long time. And then COVID happened, and then your QR code will like boom, because then like everyone needs to scan a code to show that you have your vaccines, that you're safe basically. So even like whenever you, I mean, everyone knows that, but when you go to a restaurant, like you had to take out your phone, scan the QR code to get the menu, scan the QR code to pay. Like all of these actions put the QR code into a no-brainer for anyone to be able to say, okay, I can scan it and it's going to react to my phone, which was not necessarily the case before.
Yeah, and I think it's done a really, I can't think of a better word than revolutionized, but maybe that's too strong of a word. But in terms of the restaurant industry, for example, now restaurants are able to update their menus in real time practically. Those menus are then transmitted to the customer without having to print out tons and tons of paper, having to laminate it, having to redesign it, all that kind of stuff, which is great.
Yeah. And when it comes to customer experience, like what's good with QR code is again, like you get that feeling of real time. Like if you were to do it through paper or do it through, like you still see that sometimes in hotel rooms and so on, like do your feedback cards, like that it gives you the information in real time. And also you can attach metadata to the QR code. So for example, you can create QR code per restaurant, QR code per store, QR code per product. Like you can, in the URL of any given QR code, you can attach like some metadata, which makes the QR code a lot more clever than, like just a regular, like you don't want to have one QR code for all your locations or all your physical points. Like you want to have specific, like metadata attached. And I'm always surprised, for example, when you go to McDonald's on your tickets, you're going to have a QR code to leave a review on your experience. And this QR code doesn't contain any metadata. Like it will ask you like, where's the store, like where did you order, but it's like even though that information is already written on the ticket. And so you want to avoid this as much as possible and to make that QR code as clever as possible. And again, like this is nothing related to AI, it's just like good software, right, to capture that information, generate a unique QR code, and then you make your customer experience like great simply by not asking like tons of information that you already have, which I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, something I wanted to discuss, and maybe we can expand on this point that you've just mentioned, is some of the best practices that QR codes can have in order to have a better response rate, in order to make sure the quality of feedback is improved. I don't know if you've got anything more to add in terms of especially response rate.
Yeah, so context, very important. Making sure that it's at the end of the experience as much as possible. So we got lots of use cases at Feeder with this, but let's say your restaurants, like the QR code has to be at the exits, like not in front of the staff. If you are like an airport, like you want this to be at the end, like when you either exit the airport, so going through an airplane, or whether you're going out of the airplane after you get like all your baggage and so on. So you want to target very specific moment of the customer journey, because you don't have like 50 shots at it. Like people won't scan your QR code like at every single point of the journey. You have one shot. They won't scan every single QR code. You have one shot. So you have to be very clever about like where you're going to put these QR codes. And then in terms of response rate, Carlos, like there's again, nothing very new, but just you need to make it like very clear, very easy to understand. And so what some of our customers have done, which I think is very clever, is like either making like big posters about them, very visual, eye-catching elements, some jokes, just make catching someone's attention, and like turning it into more of a like, hey, we're open to your feedback, like we're here to listen, but finding a fun way to say that, and something that is eye-catching will give a very high response rate.
I'd love to move on to our next method. So we talked about QR codes, another way we can connect. And I love the analogy you gave with branching the physical world to the digital world. I think that's a really nice way of imagining it. I'd love to go through to our next method, which is Google reviews. What to you makes Google reviews actionable?
Well, yeah, it's not just going to be Google reviews. Just Google reviews happens to be the most important one right now. The only thing is like the difference between like Trustpilot and Google reviews. Like Trustpilot is not location based, so it's more designed like for online stores. It was like Google reviews are attached to locations, which are attached to physical locations on Google Maps. So that I think that's why they are the most important ones today, which again, like is if you think about like the amount of information you got in there and the impact of this information as well, like I think that's why it's the best way to do that.
Especially for B2C.
Yeah, definitely. Like only for you're right. Like but for B2B, like most of the time you do have the contact information. So you might not have to go through the physical world in most cases, because you need like, again, like Metro, which is a very like B2B grocery chain, like they have every customer to join, like you need an account. So they have this information, which in the B2C world, you don't always have. And it's like, I think what's also very interesting is like for public services, where again, like when you go use any kind of public service, like they don't necessarily ask you like who you are, where you come from. They don't have like a CRM system. So it gets very challenging to get that information. And you also have like maybe on the B2B side as well, like the customers of the customer, like the very end users, then yeah, sometimes you're right, like you don't have that information. But anyways, like from a Google's review standpoint, like what's very important is that you have a lot of information, and this information was very tough to analyze and to act on until the AI revolution. Until then, it's very tough to analyze like thousands of reviews, and what customers and companies used to do a lot were replying, and making sure that very good systems to reply uh, like very quickly. But at the end of the day, you need to see the big picture. You need to understand what's going on. You need to understand where you can improve, and you need to understand for every single pain point, like what is the impact of these pain points. And AI is a big game changer for that, because you can link the context which you get from Google, so the store location, the region, the like all of this information, the store hours, like all of that, with the end experience which happen actually on in the physical world. And this is great because, again, like if you know how to tap into that, like it gives you a lot of insight.
I'd love to cover how we can, from a customer experience perspective, encourage customers to leave more detailed reviews. I'm sure you've come across times where you get the one word like, okay, great, could be better, not very actionable. And so I think it's the job of a customer experience lead to try and encourage or try and put at the right touch point so you can invoke a feeling from the customer. So I'd love for you to just expand on that.
Yeah, and again, we have a lot of use cases where they do that very, very well. For your customers, like I think one thing that always work is like being very, like, again, as someone that's looking to understand what's going on and to make sure that the company is the best version of itself, like you want to talk to your team and you want to make sure that they understand the value of getting these reviews in. So there's a very clear commercial advantage of being first on this kind of like Google Map platforms. So they need to understand that, and they also need to understand that the like the quality of the review. So basically, it's training your team to say to your customers that if you enjoyed the experience or not, by the way, please leave us a review, give us information about what we would improve, and if you like it, say us why you liked it. And I think like this communicate, like this first like step of communication, which doesn't imply like I'll give you a $5 reward or like a coupon to that. Like you don't have to do that. But the point is like you want to communicate and to be very clear, to be like, hey, we are listening to you, and like we'll take your feedback, whether it's good or whether it's bad. And at the end of the day, the more content they give you, the more actionable that feedback is going to be at the end of the day. So you want to make sure that your team is properly trained to do that, and then reward it as well. So if you have like 20 locations, you can know the one that performed the most in terms of revenue, sure, but you can also do that with their like their Google review score.
Yeah. One thing I think a lot of customers on our side tend to have is having Google reviews at the end of a survey as well. So that's another potential example. So, if you've caught someone at a particular touch point, you've sent an email across, they've clicked the call to action, they've given, in-depth feedback. Often, in order to close that loop, we have a call to action at the end, and the user can then click through that and give a Google review. And I think that's also another way of continuing that feedback loop. One thing that might be encouraging that I think it's hard to digest is not just targeting those with good feedback and asking for a review, but potentially, being transparent enough to be like, look, we are okay with all Google review feedback because ultimately all feedback is better than no feedback. And being able to work and take action, and especially as you mentioned, using AI to develop trends, to understand topics that are being created from it, can help you take action faster than just looking for the good feedback to bump up your score.
Yeah, and taking it one step further with like you can also automate the action plans as well. So like for this specific store or this specific location, like these are the actions which have been mentioned by your customers, which can be anything from like fixing the escalator, but it's been mentioned 20 times last week, to making the arrows are not up to date, or like there was a holiday and you know what, you forget to update your opening arrows. Like again, these are signals, but at the end they do impact the revenues, they do impact the competitiveness of the business. And so yeah, you want to make sure that this is at the core of like it's on top of your staff's mind, right?
Great. So our last method today is using for feedback collection. So again, if you could just give me an understanding of what that means to you in terms of measuring customer experience in the physical world, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, like you don't want to do it with paper, but you don't have the contact information to send a survey. And some people who won't use a QR code. So one way to do that, which I think we've all seen a lot, is like tablets. So you see that a lot in airports. Like I think they are the most, like kind of like every airport do that nowadays, where you get like this feedback tablets. There are a couple of pros, there are a couple of cons. In the pros, like the thing is you get real-time feedback. You also have something that is where you will probably get more responses than the QR code. And you also have something that you can Like you can have it at very specific point of the journey, which you might not have in other places. But in the cones, like it's expensive. Like you need to buy a tablet for every single. Like yeah, you need to buy the hardware. There's no like there is no way around it. And then you also need to buy the software. That is not this easy because like you need the survey to basically repeat itself. Sometimes it's offline, so you need to find a way to send the data back, and it might not give you that much information either. Like if you compare to Google reviews, like Google reviews, the problem is you only have like 2 data points. I mean, customer experience data points. So you have the reviews and the verbatim, like the Google review text. Whereas like with a survey, like again, you can ask any questions you want, so that's pretty useful. But again, it's quite expensive. And well, depends where, but you can also have some issues with robbery, like with basically like the iPad being stolen. That's like that's not very useful if you
Yeah.
because they will live with your hardware, but they will also take your feedback with them if it's not connected to the internet. So
Yeah, and I think another thing to highlight is the fact that usually they are like smileys. They're very clear indicators of like good, bad, positive, negative. But as you mentioned, it doesn't really expand further than that. So you don't really understand why that person is feeling negative. And I think the only way you could is to map that information out. So if you're working on a really large scale area, for example, a shopping mall, you might be able to have it in certain points. And just with measuring negative feedback, for example, you might then go, okay, there's something in this location that's not working. So it's very like localized to a specific area rather than the experience itself. Does that make
yeah.
sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. But again, like I think the thing with the hardware kind of like tablets way of getting and measuring customer experience is you have like 3 like you like have 2 main ones. You have the ones that you've mentioned, Carlos, with the buttons, like where you have just have the 3 buttons, which there is actually like only one provider that do that. I think it's Feedback Now, which was bought by Forrester, I think. Like, and you only see them in airports. Like, that's like you rarely see them in stores and so on. And then you have like tablets, which are basically like iPads, which you see a lot more like in shops and in malls and so on. You don't really tend to see them in restaurants because again, like if you have your hands dirty and so on, like that's like yeah, that kind of sucks. But yeah, and the one that you've mentioned with the 3 buttons, yeah, that's quite useless because again, at the end of the day, it only makes sense when you compare it to like a lot of other locations, but it doesn't give you like any information about like who clicked that button. It doesn't give you any information about
Exactly.
the data point is very, very, very low, and the level of insight that you're going to get is also very, very low. Whereas like with a tablet, like with an iPad, for example, like you can ask your own questions, but again, like you want, the problem is that if you ask like 20 questions, like first of all, people will leave, and second of all, like you don't have like 50 iPads, you have like one. So, like you will have people that like you're basically going to have like one answer every 20 minutes or every couple of hours, which is not going to be very useful. And that's why, like, if you compare it to QR code, where you just have to scan and then you have your own device, so you take your own time and so on. Or Google reviews, it's a little bit less expensive because you don't have to buy the hardware. And at the end of the day, if you analyze the text very well, it's very useful because again, like you will find this kind of information. You just have to work a little bit harder to get it.
Yeah. Now there's technology that is being brought out that records facial expressions
Yeah.
through a tablet screen. I'd love for us to maybe touch on that a little bit. Do you find this an effective method, firstly?
And so just to give a bit of context to our viewers, like right now we have models like AI models that can take facial expression that have been trained to, like if I'm smiling or if I'm like angry and so on, like like a model know that, like he can detect it because it's been trained on like millions of faces on different facial expressions. So it will know very well, like a AI will know very well if I'm having the worst day of my life, I'm having the best day of my life, like if I'm looking forward to that's coming next hour. So I think it's very, like, the technology is there, but then there's like 2 concerns. There's the first concern, which is like security and like not everyone wants to have his face recorded. Also, you have to ask for the consent of the user, which is if you just have like of the shopper, of the customer, like if you just have a camera that's recording you, yeah, you didn't ask him for my consent, right? And good for us that it's not authorized, because that would be very concerning. And so even though you would authorize it, then there is another thing, which is like, okay, Actionable easy data he gets. It's kind of like very close to, at the end of the day, to the three buttons that we've just discussed, Carlos. Like with the green button, the yellow button, the red button. Like it gives you exactly the same information with maybe a little bit more details. Like until you have like a recording of someone that says like that's going to share his experience, then it's another story. Like if you share your experience and you're going to like record yourself to give that feedback that you would have given on Google reviews, but you give it with like looking into straight into a camera and recording yourself. Well, then that's very, and no doubt about it, that's a very strong way to get that feedback. But in reality, like very few people will do that. And the kind of like low commitment version of this, which is just like, hey, we'll just record your emotion, doesn't give you much information. So that's why like it doesn't, and there's a huge privacy concern. So that's why like it doesn't really take off at this point, which do make sense, right? I mean, from a point of view.
Yeah. Are you aware on your end about any kind of regulations or best practices that companies should follow with this technology at this stage?
Yeah, your face is your biological data, and this is not like just your email address. This is your biological data, which is not like there's a lot of regulation on that from like where you store that information or you handle this information. So that's why it's very like, at least in Europe, you won't see that for quite some time. Like I think again, like depending on where you live, you might see that. But I think it's more of a like gadget technology for now. Like again, the technology itself is very powerful. Makes lots of sense if you're working for a government agency. When it comes to customer experience, Google reviews will probably be a lot more reliable. It will probably give you a lot more. And again, the data is already there. Like, or use QR codes. But at the end of the day, like it will be less expensive. You will get a lot more information, and you still use good technology. Like you need good AI to understand like thousands of reviews, to understand trends, to detect, like to measure impact, to create action plans. Like this whole process is not like, it's not easy to do, but it for sure will give you more information and more actionable insight that 90% of your customers were smiling when they were leaving the store. Because again, like great, but again, as we've discussed at the very beginning of this podcast, like it's emotion. So maybe they're smiling because they just got a kid, not necessarily because of their visit on the shop, right?
Yeah, they bought a watch.
Yeah, though again, like, and maybe they went to your store, but they bought something before, which make them very happy. And then like, so again, Google reviews, it's very targeted. It's on your store. There's lots of text in there. So yeah, I think that's yeah.
Okay, great. I think we can recap. So let's start from the top. So the way of collecting customer experience data in the physical world poses quite a lot of significant challenges. A lot of that is down to collecting the right type of information. There's information everywhere, and how do we home that in to get the right information at the right time? It can be influenced by human behavior. So if you're talking to a customer support representative, or it's in the shop and the person is offering you to give feedback, it's very hard to give an honest review in that sort of scenario. Covering the three methods we talked about, we covered QR codes firstly. And one of the kind of effective ways, one of the best practices that we can have is attaching metadata directly to the QR code. That gives a lot of context to the feedback and allows you to take action. And what's great about the QR code is it's pinpointing usually at a particular point of the customer journey. So for example, use the restaurant as an example. Then we covered Google reviews. So Google reviews is there's a step back. It's not necessarily, when you're in the store where you might give the feedback, but it might be on your way home. It might be a week later. What's great about that is there's two data points. We are collecting ratings and we're collecting text. And thanks to the revolution that we've had over the last couple of years, we're able to digest large amounts of text data in order to take action better. And then we covered tablets. So tablets are often seen as high volume, low quality. We covered the example of an airport having smileys. And we also touched on, the kind of facial recognition side of things as well. Both seem to be not quite there in terms of not being able to take further action apart from your customers are happy, your customers are sad. And so I think ultimately taking in these three methods on board, it's really important to have a team that is knowledgeable in the customer experience. And also asking customers to, give clear and honest feedback, because at the end of the day, the feedback you have is going to be used to improve their customer experience.
Makes a lot of sense, Carlos. Thank you very much.
Good stuff. Well, Francois, thanks again for your time and see you in the next one.
See you, Carlos. Bye-bye.
Cheers.